Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. Hello and welcome to another episode of Friendly Friday, a weekly series where we take a look at budget, standard or modern decks, and this week we're taking a look at blue-white, cycling and standard. This is essentially a blue-white control deck, but instead of winning with Approach of the Second Sun, we're winning with Drakehaven, a 3-mana enchantment that says whenever you cycle or discard a card, you can pay 1 mana, and if you do, you can make a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying, so those quickly add up to swarm your opponent. The other big advantage of playing all of these cycling cards is that we get to play with Abandoned Sarcophagus, a 3-mana artifact that says you can cast non-land cards with cycling from your graveyard, essentially giving you a second hand and a lot of card advantage. So let's go over the entire deck here, starting out with Censor, a 2-mana instant that can counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 mana, but we can also just cycle it away for single blue mana later in the game when the first mode is not that relevant anymore. We also have 2 copies of Search for Azcanta as our other big card advantage engine, transforms into Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin, and most of the cards in our deck are non-creature spells that we can find with the Sunken Ruin. Then we've already covered Abandoned Sarcophagus, synergizes nicely with Search for Azcanta before you deploy the Sarcophagus, since the Search for Azcanta will fuel your graveyard, putting a lot of cards with cycling in the graveyard that you can then recast with the Abandoned Sarcophagus in play, but once you do deploy the Sarcophagus, any card that's not being cycled going to the graveyard will get exiled. Then we also have 2 copies of Renewed Faith, which can cycle for 2 mana, gaining us 2 life in the process. Otherwise we can cast it to gain 6 life, but that's not going to happen very often. Then we have the full 4 copies of Countervailing Winds, a counterspell that counters anything unless the controller pays 1 mana for each card in your graveyard, so another reason why Search for Azcanta is so powerful in this deck, and we can also cycle it away for 2 generic mana. Then of course 4 copies of Drakehaven, and if you have multiple copies of Drakehaven in play, you can make multiple Drake tokens with every card you cycle, as long as you can pay for every Drake token. Then we have 4 copies of Cast Out as a nice catch-all answer to various problematic permanents, like Planeswalkers, artifacts, but of course we can also exile creatures with it, and otherwise we can just cycle it away for a single white mana, so the opportunity cost is very low. Then we have a bunch of sweepers in the deck, 3 copies of Settle the Wreckage, exiling all attacking creatures from target player, giving them a land for each exiled creature, and we also have 3 copies of Fumigate, destroying all creatures, gaining us 1 life for each creature destroyed this way. Then finally we also have 4 copies of Hieroglyphic Illumination, which we can cycle for 1 blue mana or cast for 4 mana to draw 2 cards. And finally 4 copies of Curator of Mysteries, which we are often just going to cycle away for 1 mana, but we can also cast it as a 4 mana 4/4 flyer that lets us scry 1 whenever we cycle or discard another card, so scrying before drawing the card from the cycling is always nice, and this one synergizes very nicely with the Abandoned Sarcophagus, since early on we're just going to cycle it away, and then later in the game we have access to a 4 mana 4/4 from the graveyard, which is pretty awesome. Then the mana base is pretty straightforward, 8 plains, 8 islands, then 4 Irrigated Farmlands, which we can also cycle away for 2 mana and otherwise enters the battlefield tapped, and then 4 Glacial Fortress, which will enter the battlefield untapped most of the time. Then taking a look at our sideboard real quick, we've got 4 copies of Authority of the Consuls for the mono-red deck, as well as 3 copies of Regal Caracal, making multiple life-linking cat tokens. Then we have a bunch of counterspells for the combo and control matchups, 1 copy of Spell Pierce, 3 copies of Negate, and we also have 2 copies of Jace's Defeat, which can also come in against the various 4-color energy builds that also run the Scarab God. And then finally 2 copies of Nimble Obstructionist, which is very nice against decks running cards like Cast Out, since we can counter the trigger and draw a card, but also nice against control decks in general as a 3/1 flyer that can pressure their life total, maybe attack a Planeswalker. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the draw. This hand's a little slow, but I think it's still a keep. Don't have a 1 mana cycler unfortunately, but we do have Renewed Faith on 2, and then Sarcophagus on 3, and then a bunch of sweepers to catch us back up. So I think we'll be fine. Opponent with a turn 1 attune, so this could be Sultai Energy. And Search for Azcanta is a nice one, so let's lead with Island, say go. And then turn 2 we might just run out the Search for Azcanta. There we see Botanical Sanctum into Winding Constrictor, so they do have their snake in play already, which is a scary card, but we do have a bunch of sweepers. I think we'll be okay here. Let's run out to Search on turn 2, which is going to help us set up our draws, find the second wise source to cast this Settle the Wreckage and Fumigate. Is this a Rishkar? Yep. So the opponent full on aggro mode here, putting 2 counters on each creature, attacking us for 4. So we really need to find that second white source for Settle. So let's see what Search reveals. Cast out, I think, let's see. Yeah, I think we need to put that in the graveyard, since we already have a cycler for white mana in Renewed Faith. So let's just play the island, say go. And the plan here is to cycle the Renewed Faith to help us dig towards that second white source and to also gain us 2 life, which is not irrelevant. So we're about to take 8 damage here, which is quite a bit. That works. Let's see if the opponent adds more creatures to the board. They probably do have Hostage Taker to steal our Sarcophagus, potentially, so we do have to keep that in mind. So let's cycle a Renewed Faith, gain 2, draw a card, and Countervailing Winds we cannot cycle, so we'll have to untap. Hope to find that second white source here. Glacial Fortress not going in the graveyard. And now the opponent has to respect Settle the Wreckage, as well as a potential Fumigate next turn. So let's see if they attack with both. If they do, we will definitely cast the Settle here, which does not target any of the opponent's creatures, so a card like Blossoming Defense is not going to help them. But they do get 2 lands for their troubles, which is nice in a deck with the Walking Ballista as a mana sink. Rogue Refiner to play, that's fine. And we get to untap. Search for Azcanta reveals Fumigate. I think we do put that in the graveyard here, even though it is a card I want to have in multiples in this matchup. But we already have one in hand, kind of want to hit our land drops, find that Drake Haven. So here, I think we're okay just passing and cycling a bunch end of turn or using Countervailing Winds to counter something relevant, and we will just take 3 damage from the Rogue Refiner, that's fine. So down to 7 we go, we can gain some more life from the Renewed Faith. Winding Constrictor, that's okay, not gonna counter that one. Opponent's just passing, so I think we want to either cycle the Renewed Faith or cast the Hieroglyphic Illumination. I think we just cast the Illumination though. Find Censor, which we can also cycle. Alright, and there's another Settle, perfect. So now our Search for Azcanta can transform after putting Censor in the graveyard. And now we have a full grip, so I think we can just pass a turn. Opponent does once again attack with both. We will cast Settle. Glintsleeve Siphoner is fine. And then end of turn we'll cycle a Countervailing Winds. Alright, Plains is nice, so opponent can draw extra cards with the Glintsleeve Siphoner here, but I think it's time to deploy Abandoned Sarcophagus. And then we still keep up Countervailing Winds, or Azcanta, and of course all the cycling cards in our graveyard, which we do want to cast the Countervailing Winds from the graveyard before casting the one in hand. So eventually we'll find an answer for the Glintsleeve Siphoner, and then it's going to be pretty easy to win the game from there. Siphoner attacks for 2. And Hostage Taker gets cast. I think we'll just counter that with a Countervailing Winds from the graveyard. That works. Untap, find a Curator of Mysteries, which we can cycle and then also cast. I guess we could cast out the Glintsleaf Siphoner right now if we want to. It's pretty likely that our opponent has a Blossoming Defense, however, but I guess we can counter that as well. Alright, I guess we'll cast this cast out with the Sarcophagus. See if they have a response. There's a defense. Do we want to respond to that? I guess we can just tap out for Countervailing Winds. If they have a second Blossoming Defense, that could be annoying. So if we counter back and our opponent has a giant Walking Ballista, then we're in trouble. So I think we just let this happen. And say go. And then we can use Renewed Faith from the graveyard to gain some life back. Opponent cycles the Fetid Pools, that's okay. Opponent gets in for 2, that happens. And there's Walking Ballista for 3, which we will counter. Don't have any counters left in the graveyard, so we'll cast the one from hand. Tune resolves. And then we'll cycle Curator. Find another Fumigate. Untap. So we could just Fumigate to get rid of this Siphoner. And then we can always Renewed Faith in response to a Walking Ballista. That seems okay. And then I think we actually play out this farmland, even though we already have a lot of lands in play, just to have access to more white mana. And then we can start activating our Azcanta finally. So let's pass it back. Another Siphoner. Don't have any counters for that one, so that resolves. And end of turn we'll cycle the Renewed Faith from hand. Find another Curator, which we also cycle. Untap. Alright, so can Fumigate once again. And then we should be in a clear. Just as a 1-for-1, but we've got plenty of cards in the graveyard to get card advantage from, so let's see if we finally get to activate our Azcanta. We could activate Azcanta, but that doesn't do much. I guess we can cycle the Curator since we're gonna do that no matter what. And do we want to use our Countervailing Winds? I actually don't think the Winding Constrictor is such a big deal here. I would rather counter something like a Longtusk Cub, which does more damage. End of turn we'll use Azcanta. Could also cast one of our draw spells from the graveyard. Instead we find 4 lands. Well, at least that's 4 lands we're not drawing. Untap, find a Censor. I guess we can just make a bunch of Curators from our graveyard. But that seems pretty weak against another Hostage Taker from the opponent, so I think we'll start by cycling Censor. Find a Glacial Fortress. I guess we'll play out the Search for Azcanta and say go. Constrictor gets in for 2. That's okay. And end of turn, let's use Azcanta. Alright, there's our Drakehaven. And then I guess we can cast in Illumination as well from the graveyard. Untap. We'll put Sarcophagus in the graveyard, but we're not transforming since we already have Azcanta in play. Find a second copy of Drakehaven, that's nice, so let's see, play one of them. I guess we can play both. And then play out the plains. So now we can cycle the farmland, make 2 Drake tokens. And I guess our opponent is likely to have a Fatal Push in hand still, so double blocking maybe doesn't make a ton of sense. So we'll still take 2 from the Winding Constrictor. And they're going for the Blossoming Defense, so this would be for 4. That's okay. Do they have another one? They do. Well, I guess we're just casting Renewed Faith from the graveyard instead of cycling a bunch. So if this can happen, we'll take 6 down to 5. Still have Countervailing Winds for a big ballista. And do we actually want to use the farmland now? I guess we don't, so we can just cast another Renewed Faith instead. So we're at 11. Trying to get max value out of our cycling cards. Glacial Fortress can go in the graveyard, still not transforming. Alright, find a cast out, so let's just pass it back. And now we can start making a whole bunch of Drake tokens. Rishkar, I guess we'll cast out the Winding Constrictor here. And then just give our opponent a 3/3 Rishkar. That's not too bad. And then end of turn. Certainly making 2 Drakes here. And they're pushing one of them, that's fine. And then make a second one. Draw a card, find another Drake Haven, and then I guess we'll use our Azcanta here. Find another cast out. Island can go in a graveyard. Find another Drake Haven, alright, so now we should have things covered. Can make 4 Drake tokens with every card we cycle. Get in for 2. We'll take the damage. Rogue Refiner is fine. Another Rogue Refiner is also okay, I think. We could use our Countervailing Winds, but we really want to spend our mana making Drakes here. And a Winding Constrictor, that's okay. End of turn, cycle cast out. And make all the Drake tokens. Untap. Plains in the graveyard, still not transforming. Alright, let's get in for 10. Pause a turn. And before blockers, we'll make some more Drakes. Opponent pushes one of them, that's fine. And another push, that's also fine. Draw cast outs. I guess we'll cycle that one as well. Alright. So managed to beat Sultai here, onto sideboarding. I don't think we want to change too much in this matchup. Jace's defeat can counter some things, including negates from the opponent that they're probably gonna board in. So I don't mind having access to a few Jace's defeats, but there's nothing in particular I want to take out of the deck. Can maybe shave on some of the Curators of Mysteries, which don't do a whole lot. I think we just run it back. Our deck is pretty well set up for the matchup already. And this hand looks acceptable. And we're probably gonna cycle turn 1 with the Curator here. No turn 2 play. Cycle the Curator. And Sarcophagus is a nice one. I think we actually play out the farmland here since we'll need the second white source. Is this a Rogue Refiner? Nope, Deathgorge Scavenger. Alright, that's actually pretty good against us. But it's also still a creature that dies to our various sweeper effects, so not the end of the world. So, land go. Opponent can get in for 3 points. And there's an Attune which resolves. Swamp into Winding Constrictor. I think we just cycle our Countervailing Winds here. Find a Plains. I don't think we cycle the Censor quite yet. And let's see if they attack with both into our Settle. They could also have negates up, but I think that's fine since we get to fumigate them if they negate or settle, and I would rather actually resolve the fumigate rather than give them 2 lands. Let's settle our opponents. And there's a spell pierce, that's okay. So we'll take a hit from these creatures, but then we get to follow up with Fumigate. Take 6 down to 11. And they're gonna keep up their mana, so they could actually have another negate or spell pierce, which would make this Fumigate a little awkward. But what's the other option? We could cast out in their upkeep and get rid of the Scavenger. Yeah, perhaps we go with the cast out on upkeep. I guess that's bad against a Blossoming Defense from the opponent. So maybe after all, just going for the Fumigate might be better. Alright, that works. We're back at 13. And let's see if our opponent has some more follow-up creatures. Longtusk Cub, that's okay. Untap, find another cast out. Let's see here, opponent's got 2 energy, they can pump the cub once. So we can cast out and Censor. And then next turn Sarcophagus and cast out, that seems pretty good. So let's pass the turn. And I think we just let our opponent attack with the cub and then cast out end of turn just to play around Blossoming Defense. Now Rishkar, perhaps we want to have a response to that. So if our opponent targets the cub, that would make the cub a 3/3, potentially 4/4. If they have Blossoming Defense now, that would be painful if we go for the cast out. I think we let them spend the energy, and if they do, we cast out, otherwise we don't. If they're spending the energy, I think we're going for the cast out. And do they have the Blossoming Defense? And yep, there's a Blossoming Defense. So yeah, that works. So we do take a pretty big hit. But we did get the Blossoming Defense out of their hand. End of turn we'll cycle Censor. Find another one, cycle that as well. Alright, Countervailing Winds, maybe a reason not to play out the Sarcophagus yet and just keep up the Countervailing Winds instead. So I think we let our opponent draw and see if they want to attack with both into a potential Settle the Wreckage, or if they just attack with the Longtusk Cub, in which case we can just use our cast out. Alright, they're not playing around Settle, so let's see if cast out works. If that works, we'll take 3 from Rishkar, down to 4. And another cub we can counter unless they pay 4, so let's do that. That works. Do they have another follow-up? Walking Ballista for 1. Alright, so we do need to draw something here. Just an island, so we can run out Sarcophagus and then pretend we have Settle the Wreckage, but that's pretty unlikely. We're pretty dead to an attack from both. So perhaps could have prevented 2 damage by casting the cast out end of turn rather than hoping they didn't have the Blossoming Defense. So if we were still at 6, then an attack puts us to 2, and then Walking Ballista still finishes us off. So let's see. Still don't think we want to change anything in particular, so let's just run it back. This hand's a little suspect, but we do have Censor plus Curator we can cycle with this one island, so I think this is a keep. Let's lead with islands, say go. And definitely cycling the Curator first, since Censor actually does something on turn 2. Duress, we could have cycled Censor in response in case they take that, but I'm probably fine if they take the Censor here, since we have more high impact cards later in the game. And by not cycling in response, we give the opponent less information. So they did take the Fumigate, which is the logical choice. So let's cycle Curator. Find Glacial Fortress, just like we drew it up. So we have the option of playing out the farmlands and cycling Censor and then having access to Countervailing Winds, or we can actually keep up Censor on turn 2, which I think is pretty important in this matchup, so I'm fine with playing out the Glacial Fortress here. If they don't present anything, we can just cycle a Countervailing Winds, or potentially cycle both Cast Out and Censor to ensure hitting a third land. I think Censor still has value here, so I'm gonna cycle a Countervailing Winds instead. Alright, perfect. Find all the lands we need. So now we're actually pretty happy hanging on to some of these cards. End of turn. I think I'll even cycle this farmland. And then cycle the Censor. Find a Drakehaven. Could just run out our Drakehaven, but I don't want to run it into a counterspell here, so I'm happy just passing the turn. Rishkar is fine, not the most threatening card. And now we get to resolve our Drakehaven. Opponent could have an appetite for the Unnatural to destroy it potentially, but that is not the end of the world, since it also gets our Cast Out. Opponent gets in. So this is where we want to find one of our card advantage engines, like Search for Azcanta, or just draw into a bunch of cyclers in a row. Glintsleeve Siphoner, that resolves, but is definitely a card we're interested in killing with our Cast Out. I think we just untap. Find a Settle, alright, so I think we'll just say go here. And then we can settle if they attack with both. If they just attack with Glintsleeve Siphoner, we can also make 2 Drake tokens potentially and double block. Winding Constrictor, I think resolves. And they're attacking with both. Let's settle them. See if they have a negate. They do. Alright, so we can let that resolve. Opponent does get 2 energy from the Siphoner. So now we would like to draw into a Fumigate. Sarcophagus is pretty decent as well. We could cycle the Cast Out, make a Drake. Yeah, I think I like that. So let's pause a turn. Hostage Taker on one of our Drake tokens. Yeah, I think that's getting countered. Now it's pretty risky for the opponent to attack with these Siphoners, since we can just make a Drake and double block. So they're just attacking with Rishkar, that's fine, we'll take it. And I actually think we cycle this without value, just to get deeper into our deck. Maybe find that Fumigate. Alright, so I think we just run out Sarcophagus. And then I think we can say go. Since our opponent doesn't have energy, so we don't have to cast out the Glintsleeve Siphoner yet. Opponent now attacking with everyone. So let's see, I think we will, before blocker, cycle Censor. Let's make a Drake. Find a farmland, so we can cycle that as well. And make a Drake. Go to blocks. Block like this to prevent the most damage, and then we can cast out the Siphoner. Hostage Taker. Can steal the Sarcophagus, I guess. That's annoying. Cast out the Siphoner right now. And say go. And then we should be stable. Opponent attacks with both. We'll double block the Constrictor. End of turn cycle. Renewed Faith. Cycle that main phase. Find another Renewed Faith. Attack for 4. Another hostage taker, that works. Eats a Drake. Cycle Renewed Faith. Find a farmland, cycle. And then double block, hope they don't have Blossoming Defense. Attack for 6. And then we can cycle Curator, make 2 more Drakes, and that should do it. We'll cycle now in case they have Walking Ballista. And we got there, so a super grindy game, very close, but in the end Drakehaven was victorious. So on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener on the draw here. 2 double white cards, no white lands, but we do have 2 Curators to cycle. This hand's definitely borderline. Think we'll ship it. Alright, this is better. And Censor, I guess, can go to the bottom just because we're on the draw, so it's not going to be very effective. Evolving Wilds, don't mind seeing that. Gets a Swamp. Alright, let's cycle one of these Curators end of turn. Red-black into Servo Schematic, so this is some sort of artifact improvised deck. And there's Drakehaven. Let's run out Plains, say go. So this is a matchup where we might want to cast or cast out to get rid of either a Planeswalker or an important artifact. Let's see if we need to censor anything. An attack from the Servo means no Maverick Thopterists. Another Servo Schematic. And they're passing, so let's cycle Curator. And let's cycle Cast Out since we need to hit land drops. Alright, so we could step out for Drakehaven here. But I think we need to keep up our counterspells still. And develop our mana before deploying Drakehaven. Strangely enough, Drakehaven is not a card you always want to have in your opening hand in this deck. Since at the start you don't have enough mana to really exploit it. So here we want to try and counter something like a Herald of Anguish. Like we see here, and we can even censor it instead of using Countervailing Winds, which feels pretty good. And then we can still cycle the Curator of Mysteries. Opponent could have played around Censor by also tapping the Servo. Alright. So now things are starting to come together. I think we still keep up Countervailing Winds for a turn, since they were pretty happy running out the Herald into a counterspell, so they might have a second one. Inventor's Goggles, that's fine. And next turn we can run out Search for Azcanta and still keep up Countervailing Winds. Glimmer end of turn, that resolves. We could counter it, but our opponent's deck's got a lot of air, like lands and servo schematics that we don't care about. So I would rather counter the real stuff like Herald of Anguish. Like we don't really care about this puzzle knot. So let's take 2. Could even cycle the Countervailing Winds to make a Drake to block one of the servos in a few turns. Alright, this one I'm willing to counter, as those Thopters can be annoying. Can they counter back with a Metallic Rebuke? They sure can. So Thopterist resolves, not the end of the world. But now we do need to make those Drake tokens as soon as possible. So Search for Azcanta is gonna transform if we put this card in the graveyard. So even though I would like to draw the Illumination, I think it's worth it to transform or Search for Azcanta here. Found another Drakehaven. So we can play out a Drakehaven and still activate Azcanta. That might be okay, better than running out 2 Drakehavens that don't do anything. And now we're also representing Settle the Wreckage. Let's see if our opponent plays around it. They're most definitely not playing around it. So opponent doesn't have any cards in hand, so let's take a look at the top 4. Find some Countervailing Winds. So we can make some Drake tokens next turn, but we are starting to get pretty low here at 6 life. So could already be too late, although Renewed Faith helps. Run out another Drake Haven. Now we can cycle Renewed Faith, make 2 Drakes, and be back in the game. Opponent's gonna make another Servo. Prophetic Prism, that's fine. Let's see if they attack with everyone once again. They do. So, do need to cycle Renewed Faith here. Make 2 Drakes. So we're at 8, draw Illumination. Go to blocks, so if we block the 2 Thopters, then we take 7 to 1. That's a little risky. If we double block the Thopterist, we take 6 to 2, and then next turn we can make at least 4, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, we can make 4 Drakes. So we have enough blockers for all the small stuff. So I think I like double blocking the Thopterist here. Hoping our opponent doesn't have a relevant card in hand as their last card. 6 down to 2. 1 Drake left. And the follow-up. Hopefully no Herald. It's a Herald, isn't it? Well, that's a problem. Funny thing about discarding to Herald is that it also triggers Drakehaven, but now we're tapped out, so it doesn't really matter. I think we need to discard a Drakehaven here. So now our opponent can start sacrificing servo schematics to destroy Drakes and to make more tokens, so we're pretty dead here. Let's see, do we have an out? Don't have enough mana to Azcanta into a Fumigate. Do have enough mana to Azcanta into a Settle the Wreckage though. I think our best bet is just to pass and then activate Azcanta, hoping to find a Settle the Wreckage after our opponent attacks with everyone, since they clearly weren't playing around it earlier. So they kill a Drake. Well, they're attacking with everyone. Let's use Azcanta and hope for the best. Alright, no settle, so we're dead. On to sideboarding. So what do we want against the improvised deck? Nothing in particular. Negate can counter a Tezzeret, but that's about it. Settle seems pretty good, especially since our opponent hasn't seen it yet. I don't think we need to change anything. Would like to be on the play. Fortunately, this is a mulligan. Well, this is a close one actually, since finding a blue source lets us cycle 3 Curators, but it's probably still a mulligan. This I can get behind, and we'll keep planes on top. Lead with a tapped farmland, say go, and then we have to hope that Surge finds us lands for Fumigate, and then Fumigate gets us a nice 3-for-1. So let's run out Surge. Irrigated Farmlands is gonna go to our hand, and I guess we're running out of Drakehaven here. Cast out. It's actually not the worst draw, since it's just a random cycler for Drakehaven, so I think we'll actually draw it. Play out the farmland, say go. And let's say our opponent plays out a Tezzeret, we could even consider casting the cast out next turn to deal with it. And end of turn we'll just cycle this and make a Drake start beating down. Find another Fumigate. Planes, I guess, can go to the graveyard, since not in a hurry to cast these Fumigates. Get in for 2. Opponent could be holding a bunch of reactive cards like Negates and Metallic Rebukes. Countervailing Winds. No, I think I'll keep that one. Get in for 2. Can make another Drake end of turn if our opponent doesn't do anything. Maverick Thopterist. I guess we'll just counter that one. Sarcophagus is the kind of card we need, so let's draw that. And now that we have the Sarcophagus, we have some card advantage going, and can let cards like Thopterist resolve and then Fumigate them away later. So do they run out Herald of Anguish into a potential Censor, or do they keep it? Instead just the Thopterists, if that works. Countervailing Winds will draw, since putting it into the graveyard with Sarcophagus in play means it gets exiled, so it doesn't actually help us with Search for Azcanta. So I think we'll just hang back for now, let the opponent overextend into this Fumigate, keep up Countervailing Winds to counter potential Heralds of Anguish, although I guess now our opponent can potentially also keep up Negate, but that's fine, then we get to resolve Fumigate. Tezzeret the Schemer, well, we can cast that out once it resolves. So they're killing Drake. We could deal with one Thopter, but not enough to prevent this from dying, so that's okay. Let's see how many attack here. They're keeping the Thopters on defense to protect Tezzeret, makes sense. So we're just taking 2. And end of turn we'll use Cast Out. Let's see if they counter this one. They do. Settle the Wreckage. I don't think we want to show that to our opponent, but we kind of already have 2 Fumigate, so I guess we'll put it in the graveyard. So let's just say go. And we can always make a Drake and block with it. Just a Thopterist attacking. We'll take 2. Herald of Anguish with lots of mana still up, and they can pay for this Countervailing Winds. Does force them to tap out a little bit, but they can still keep up Metallic Rebuke, so it doesn't really help unless we cast one from hand. I guess we make him tap out here by letting them pay 3. And then I guess we can also use the Countervailing Winds from the graveyard to make them pay 2. So Negate works. That one gets exiled, so if we use the one from the graveyard now, they can simply pay for it, but they don't have access to blue mana, so Fumigates should be good. So we will have to discard one Fumigate here end of turn, but we have a second one, and we even get to make a Drake. That's nice. That one's just going to die. We'll draw the Illumination. No point in attacking, since we gain more life from just casting the Fumigate. Opponent kills a Drake in response to prevent us gaining some life. That's okay. Alright, so we've got some of our engines rolling now, but our opponent could easily have a second Herald of Anguish in hand. And at some point we need to deal with Tezzeret. Second Herald, so let's just discard the Illumination and make a Drake. Could have cycled the Illumination to get an extra card in the graveyard for Search for Azcanta. Not put the Illumination in the graveyard, since then it gets exiled. Then we can cycle it, make a Drake. Which we could discard to the Herald. That seems fine, and then we can also cast the Illumination from the graveyard if we want to. So a lot of options here. I think we just say go. Opponent's gonna kill a Drake. And kill the other one as well. Tezzeret makes a token. Servo Schematic provides fuel for the Herald. Herald attacks, so we'll take it and then cast Illumination. Try and draw 2. There's a cast out, excellent, so we can discard a land here. Don't have mana to make drakes. Search for Azcanta can go in the graveyard, and now we get to transform. If we cast out and they have a negate, that would be unfortunate. But we can pay for Metallic Rebuke. And then the question is, do we want to deal with Tezzeret or with Herald? It's also an interesting question. Could also consider cycling the cast out first before casting it, just to make an extra Drake. Let's run out Glacial Fortress since we need the mana. And there's no point in making a Drake since they can just kill it with the Herald. So let's just cast the cast out. And I think we target Herald, since they could easily have a second Tezzeret in hand. That works. So now we need to find an answer to Tezzeret, but we can just make some Drake tokens to attack Tezzeret. Glimmer of Genius resolves. Is this another Herald? We do have Countervailing Winds in the graveyard this time. But they could negate back here. And we're 1 mana short of casting Censor here. So that's unfortunate as well. So maybe that one land we should have played a few turns ago made a difference here. Untap, find a land, so we do need to use Azcanta here, since our graveyard doesn't do anything for us. So let's have a look. And unfortunately only find a Sarcophagus. And what now? Don't have any good attacks. Nothing in the graveyard that can save us. Sarcophagus doesn't do anything. Let's run out the land, I guess. Opponent can ultimate Tezzeret, which is gonna be difficult to beat. Really needed to find another cast out with our Azcanta, cast out the Herald, attack Tezzeret for 2, and then we're back in the game. But like we predicted, they did have another Tezzeret in hand anyways, so dealing with one of them was not gonna be enough in this case. Herald kills Drake token. Servo Schematic becomes a 5/5. They can attack us for 11. Aethersphere Harvester, that's actually pretty good against our Drake tokens. And discard Sarcophagus, make a Drake. Renewed Faith. Let's see, how do we get out of this? I think we're better off using Azcanta. So yeah, the reason they kept back the servo is to crew the Harvester, of course. Found a Settle the Wreckage, but they can pretty easily play around it once we get it here. Drakehaven, make 2 Drakes by cycling Renewed Faith. But our opponent still has that Herald that can kill our Drakes, so it doesn't really help. I guess Drakehaven is a way to get back in the game. Alright, so our opponent minuses Tezzeret, kills our Drake. And they will be able to attack for lethal here. Alright, they got it. So, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the play. This hand does have a cast out we can cycle, but is a little sketchy here if we miss our second land drop. So I think we go to 6. Well, this is pretty much the same, but we do get a scry. So I guess we keep this one and keep any land on top. This is not a land. This time we don't have the 1 mana cycler, but any second land lets us cycle Renewed Faith. Hopefully we hit a second land drop here next turn. Otherwise we're not gonna do much. Found Azcanta. Let's pass it back. Looks like an Asper deck, perhaps Asper Approach. There's Glacial Fortress, alright. So do we go for Search for Azcanta or do we keep up Censor? I think we don't need to go for Search yet, since it also runs into an opposing Censor. We're just gonna sit back on our cycling cards, try to hit our land drops, and then try to resolve Search when the opponent's tapped out. Opponent cycles a farmland, so still not sure if this is an approach deck or perhaps a Godpharaoh's Gift deck. Opponent says go, we'll cycle Renewed Faith. Don't really need a second Sarcophagus. Find a Fumigate. Alright, so I guess we're main phase cycling here to hit land drops. Well, we found one. Say go. So we could tap out for Sarcophagus, run that into Censor, or we can just try to resolve Search for Azcanta. If they use a hard counter, that's fine. We can still cycle, cast out, or Censor. Yeah, let's run out Search. Cycle Censor. Just to hit land drops, and say go. Could also be a cast out end of turn to exile the Search. Nope, just a Glimmer. So confirms our suspicions that this is an Esper approach deck. Which game 1 is going to be tricky, but games 2 and 3, I think we should have the upper hand. I guess an important card to find here is our Countervailing Winds. Planes we want to draw, since we want to hit land drops. Then we could run out Sarcophagus here. I'm actually okay if this gets countered, since we have a second copy. So I'm not gonna fight over it. Not that we really can fight over it, but get Supreme Willed, that's good. Probably gonna cycle this Censor end of turn. Although cast out doesn't do much in this matchup besides exiling opposing cast outs. So maybe we do cycle the cast out first, since Censor can potentially counter an approach if our opponent gets greedy. Find Curator. So I think upkeep will cycle the Curator, just to put a 6th card in the graveyard, and then see what we reveal. Countervailing Winds, actually, that's one we want to draw. So let's draw that one, play Glacial Fortress, say go, and then next turn we can maybe have a fight over this Sarcophagus. Another Glimmer. So end of turn we'll cycle Censor. Farmland, I think we just want to play. And transforming Search is also a big deal here. I think I'll draw the islands and then transform Azcanta. Run out Sarcophagus. I'm probably fine if this gets countered, since we now have the Azcanta online. So this gets disallowed. So we could counter back with our Countervailing Winds. Let's fight over this. Make them use another counterspell here. Alright, that's fine. Trading for 2 disallows, which is our opponent's best card. And an Esper approach deck is not going to have room for Field of Ruin to blow up our Azcanta. And it's fine if they resolve the first approach, it's the second approach that we have to counter. Alright, another Countervailing Winds, excellent. So let's run out Drakehaven. I'm also fine if this gets countered by a hard counter. Does not. Do we want to play out the farmland or cycle it? I'm actually tempted to still play it out, since we want to have access to as much mana as possible with this Azcanta. So now we can just activate Azcanta every turn, keep up Countervailing Winds, and then eventually start cycling some Drakes. So end of turn, activate Azcanta. Find Censor, cast out, Fumigate, let's take the cast out. And just draw go here. Activate Azcanta. Find another Drakehaven. I think we just untap and try to resolve the Drakehaven before cycling any more cards. I guess we can still play out this farmland. So for now we'll still activate Azcanta, but then at some point we'll start making some Drakes. Don't want to make too many Drakes at once to play around Settle and Fumigate. Find another cast out. Say go. Opponent passes, we'll activate Azcanta. Find a Censor. Draw a card. And I guess we'll make 2 more. And we're actually not too sad if our opponent casts a Settle the Wreckage, since having more lands in play is always useful in control mirrors. So let's attack with everyone. Vraska's Contempt, that's fine. Opponent takes 6, say go. Hypno Rivulet, alright. That could do something relevant. Opponent with Fumigate, that's okay. End of turn, use Azcanta. Find another Drakehaven. Untap, play out Drakehaven. Glimmer, that's fine. Find a Illumination. Cycle cast out. Attack for 6. Fatal Push, that's fine. Just pause a turn. Glimmer is fine. Alright, so I think we've got things covered here. With multiple Countervailing Winds in hand. Don't need to counter the first approach, as long as we counter the second one, we're fine. So there's approach. And let's see, can we actually present lethal here? So we've got 4 power in place, our opponent's at 18, so we do need to make 9 more drakes. Yeah, I think we can get there. Although we do need to draw into another cycler. And I guess our opponent can easily mess this up if they have a spot removal spell. But it might be worth going for it here. So if we go for it once again, can make 3 more drakes. Yeah, sure. Let's go for it. Untap. Move to combat. Let's see if they have a Settle. Let's counter the Settle, which typically we don't want to do in this matchup. And it could be that we're being a little impatient here, since if they have a Fatal Push, then we only have 1 counter for their approach. But this way we do close out the game a turn sooner. Alright, so managed to beat Asper approach, bring in Negates, Jace's defeats. Opponent could have Gear Hulks after sideboard, but that's okay. Do we want Nimble Obstructionist, perhaps? Don't have a lot of dead cards. Fumigate is pretty bad, Settle is pretty bad, but our opponents might board into a bunch of creatures after sideboard. But we do have the Jace's defeat to counter Gear Hulks. So what last card do we want? I guess we'll run 1 Obstructionist as a creature to pressure the opponent with. On to game 2 here, where we will be on the draw, and this hand looks quite good. Opponent probably has brought in a bunch of Duresses as well, but that's okay. Yeah, I think we'll run out Island so we can cycle a Censor to start filling our graveyard right away to turn on the Countervailing Winds. So let's cycle a Censor. End of turn. No need to run out the farmland yet. Three mana for Gideon. I guess we'll censor that. Let's see, we could resolve Drakehaven here. And I actually don't mind, since that puts some pressure on the opponent right away. If they have a cast out, we can cast out back at some point. Opponent missing a 4th land drop. I think we just play a tap land, say go. Opponent cycles a cast out, so they might have another one in hand. So we could cycle Illumination, make a Drake, that seems okay. Making that Drake to pressure the opponent with right away. Can cycle the Curators as well. So let's get in for 2. Say go. Opponent passing. Cycle some Curators. Could even consider casting the Curator in this matchup, but our opponent probably left in a few Fumigates or Settles. Cycle another one. Opponent maybe going for a Glimmer here. or cast out for the Drake Haven, that's okay. Already have some Drakes, and we still have our own cast out to deal with it. Nimble Obstructionist would have been nice against this cast out, so let's get in for 6. And now we can just sit back on our reactive cards, now that we have a 2-turn clock in play. Let's attack. Not even sure if we want to counter a Settle the Wreckage if our opponent has one, but they don't have double white yet, so they can't even cast it here. Opponent down to 6, and they are in a bit of trouble. Glimmer of Genius resolves, just need to keep our counter spells for things that matter. So even if they have Settle, we can Countervailing Winds to Settle, Jace's defeat whatever counterspell they have, and be in a good spot. Could have also cast Illumination there, but no real reason to. Attack with everyone. And are they dead? Settle, counter that. Is this a Negate? And then we're just gonna Jace's defeat. Alright. So managed to beat as per approach, which, all things told, is probably a decent matchup for us since we have fewer dead cards in game 1, and then game 2 things only get better. So I wanna thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached we will release an additional weekly series, so if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.